The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of London as Officer Marcus Thompson adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. 23 years of service to the Royal Guard had taught him that duty came before everything else. Today felt different somehow. The weight of his red tunic seemed heavier, and the familiar ache in his left knee reminded him that he wasn't getting any younger. Marcus had been walking his usual patrol route through the quiet residential area near Windsor Castle when he heard it, a soft whimper coming from behind a row of dustbins near Maple Street. His trained instincts kicked in immediately, and he quickened his pace toward the sound. What he discovered there would change not only his life, but the lives of countless others. Huddled against the brick wall of a small apartment building was a young girl, no more than 8 years old. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and dried blood stained her small hands and knees. She looked up at Marcus with eyes that held far too much pain for someone so young. Her dark hair was matted. She was shivering despite the warm morning air. Marcus knelt down slowly, removing his ceremonial hat as he approached. His voice was gentle, though his heart was racing with concern. The girl didn't speak English well, but through her broken words and gestures, he understood that she had been hurt and was afraid to go home. She kept pointing to her arm, which appeared to be injured, possibly broken. Without hesitation, Marcus scooped the child into his arms, his ceremonial sword clanking against his leg as he stood. The girl didn't resist. Instead, she seemed to find comfort in his strong, protective presence. He could feel her small body trembling as he carried her toward his patrol car, speaking softly to reassure her that everything would be all right. The nearest hospital was St. Mary's, just 15 minutes away through the busy London traffic. As Marcus drove, he kept glancing in the rearview mirror at the girl who had curled up in the back seat. She had stopped crying, but her eyes remained wide with fear and confusion. He radioed ahead to let the hospital know he was bringing in an injured child. Though he had no idea that this simple act of compassion would soon make headlines around the world, when they arrived at St. Mary's Hospital, Marcus carried the girl through the automatic doors of the emergency department. His tall frame and distinctive red uniform immediately caught the attention of everyone in the waiting area. Patients looked up from their magazines, nurses paused their conversations, and even the security guards took notice. It wasn't every day that a member of the Royal Guard walked through their doors, especially carrying an injured child. The triage nurse, Sarah Williams, had seen many unusual cases during her 15 years at the hospital, but this scene was particularly striking. The contrast between the formal, pristine uniform of the guard and the vulnerable, injured child in his arms created a powerful image that would stay with her for years to come. She quickly directed Marcus to an empty examination room, noting the care and gentleness with which he handled the frightened girl, Dr. Elizabeth Chen. The attending physician arrived within minutes. As she began her initial examination, she noticed something that puzzled her. The girl's injuries, while concerning, told a story that didn't quite add up. There were old bruises alongside fresh ones, and her malnourished appearance suggested she had been neglected for some time. The doctor exchanged a meaningful glance with Marcus, both of them beginning to suspect that this was more than just an accident. As the medical team worked to assess the girl's condition, Marcus stood quietly in the corner of the room, still in his full ceremonial uniform. He had called his supervisor to explain his absence from patrol, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. Something about this child had touched his heart in a way he hadn't expected. Perhaps it was the way she had looked at him with such trust. Or maybe it was the protective instinct that had been honed through years of service. Whatever the reason, Marcus Thompson knew that his life had just taken an unexpected turn, and there was no going back. Dr. Chun's examination revealed more troubling details about the young girl's condition. Beyond the obvious fresh injuries to her arm and leg, there were signs of chronic malnutrition and what appeared to be cigarette burns on her small shoulders. The child, who had whispered her name as Amira, seemed terrified whenever anyone raised their voice or made sudden movements. Her behavior suggested she had experienced trauma far beyond what any child should endure. Marcus watched from his position near the window, his jaw tightening as he observed the careful way the medical staff handled Amira. His military training had exposed him to many difficult situations, But seeing a child in such a vulnerable state stirred emotions he rarely allowed himself to feel. When Amira's eyes would dart nervously around the room, she always seemed to seek him out, finding comfort in his steady presence. The hospital's social services coordinator, Janet Morrison, arrived with a clipboard full of forms and questions. She was a kind woman, with gray hair and gentle eyes, but even she seemed shaken by what she was witnessing. Janet had worked with countless cases of child abuse and neglect, but there was something particularly heartbreaking about this situation. The contrast between the regal figure of the royal guard and the broken child he had rescued painted a picture that would be difficult to forget. As Janet began her interview process, she discovered that Amira spoke very little English. The girl seemed to understand more than she could express, nodding or shaking her head in response to simple questions. Through careful questioning and the help of a translator who was called in, they learned that Amira had been living with relatives who had brought her to England from Syria 2 years earlier. The promised better life had turned into a nightmare of abuse and neglect. Marcus found himself drawn into the conversation, offering details about how he had found Amira and her condition when he discovered her. His account was precise and thorough, displaying the attention to detail that had made him an exceptional guard. But beyond his professional observations, there was something else in his voice, a personal investment in this child's welfare that surprised even him. The afternoon wore on, and Marcus realized he should have returned to his duties hours ago. His radio had been quiet, suggesting his supervisor was allowing him the time he needed. But he knew this couldn't continue indefinitely. Yet every time he considered leaving, Amira would look at him with those trusting eyes, and he found himself rooted to the spot. She had become his responsibility, not by assignment but by choice. Dr. Chen returned with the results of Amira's x-rays and additional tests. The girl had a fractured wrist that would require a cast, several bruised ribs, and signs of previous injuries that had healed improperly. More concerning were the psychological evaluations that suggested deep emotional trauma. The medical team was unanimous in their opinion that Amira could not be returned to the people who had been caring for her. As the legal and social service wheels began to turn, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He approached Janet Morrison and quietly asked about the process for emergency foster care. His question caught everyone off guard. A bachelor, royal guard inquiring about taking responsibility for an abused child was unprecedented. Janet explained the rigorous background checks, home inspections, and training requirements that would be necessary. Marcus listened carefully to every detail, his mind already working through the logistics. He owned a small but comfortable flat near the castle, had a spotless service record, and most importantly, he felt a connection to this child that he couldn't ignore. When Janet finished explaining the process, Marcus looked her directly in the eye and said he wanted to begin the application. Immediately, news of Marcus's decision spread quickly through the hospital. Nurses who had been watching the situation unfold whispered among themselves about the royal guard who was willing to give up his bachelor lifestyle for a traumatized refugee child. Some were skeptical, wondering if he truly understood what he was committing to. Others were moved by the genuine care he had shown throughout the day. As evening approached, arrangements were made for Amira to stay in the hospital overnight for observation. The child services team would begin emergency placement procedures in the morning, but for now, she was safe. Marcus finally prepared to leave, but as he gathered his ceremonial hat and prepared to say goodbye to Amira, she reached out and grabbed his hand. In her limited English, she whispered, "Stay, please," and Marcus felt his heart break a little more. He spent the night in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside her bed, still in his wrinkled uniform, watching over a child who had chosen to trust him with her fragile hope for a better future. The morning brought a flurry of activity that Marcus hadn't anticipated. Word of his situation had reached his commanding officers, and Colonel Harrison arrived at the hospital before visiting hours officially began. Marcus expected disciplinary action for abandoning his post, but instead found understanding and support from his superior officer. Colonel Harrison had served for 30 years and recognized the character of the man. Standing before him in his wrinkled ceremonial uniform, more Surprising was the arrival of several fellow guards who had come to check on their colleague and the child he had rescued. Sergeant Williams brought a fresh uniform and toiletries, while Corporal Davies carried a small teddy bear he had purchased from the hospital gift shop. These hardened military men, trained to maintain stoic composure in all situations, found themselves deeply moved by Amira's plight and Marcus's commitment to helping her. The hospital staff was equally supportive. Though they maintained their professional skepticism about the feasibility of Marcus's plan, Dr. Chen pulled him aside to discuss the long-term medical needs Amira would have, including ongoing therapy for her physical and emotional trauma. The doctor's concerns were practical rather than dismissive. She wanted to ensure that Marcus understood the full scope of what he was undertaking. Janet Morrison arrived with a team of social workers and legal advisors. The paperwork for emergency foster placement was complex under normal circumstances, but Marcus's unique profession added additional layers of scrutiny. His job required him to be available for royal duties at any time, often with little notice. The demanding schedule and security requirements of his position raised legitimate questions about his ability to provide stable care for a traumatized child. However, Marcus had spent the sleepless night thinking through every possible obstacle and had begun formulating solutions. He spoke with Janet about flexible work arrangements, emergency childcare options, and the possibility of involving other guard families in a support network. His thorough preparation impressed the social workers, who were accustomed to people making impulsive decisions about foster care without considering the practical implications. Amira's condition improved significantly overnight, both physically and emotionally. The presence of Marcus seemed to provide her with a sense of security she hadn't felt in years. When the medical team performed their morning examination, she was more cooperative and even attempted to smile when made funny faces to distract her during uncomfortable procedures. The transformation was remarkable to witness. The media attention began unexpectedly when a hospital visitor recognized Marcus and took a photo of him sleeping in the chair beside Amira's bed. The image, showing the formal royal guard in his ceremonial uniform keeping watch over the small refugee child, was shared on social media and quickly went viral. Within hours, reporters were calling the hospital seeking information about the story behind the compelling photograph. Hospital administration found themselves managing an unprecedented situation. The switchboard was overwhelmed with calls from news outlets, while security had to manage the growing number of photographers gathering outside the building. Dr. Chen and the hospital director met with Marcus to discuss how to handle the media attention while protecting Amira's privacy and his own professional reputation. Marcus was uncomfortable with the publicity, but recognized that it might help bring attention to the broader issues of child welfare and refugee support. He agreed to a brief, carefully managed statement to the press, emphasizing that his actions were simply those of any decent person who encountered a child in need. He refused to discuss specific details about Amira's case, citing privacy concerns and the ongoing legal proceedings. The response from the public was overwhelming and largely positive. Messages of support poured in from around the world, with people praising Marcus for his compassion and dedication. Many shared their own stories of adoption and foster care, while others offered practical help ranging from donations to volunteer services. The Royal Guard's headquarters received hundreds of calls and letters commending Marcus's actions. However, the attention also brought scrutiny from those who questioned whether a single military man was the appropriate guardian for a traumatized refugee child. Some critics argued that more traditional family placements would be preferable, while others questioned whether Marcus's motivations were genuine or influenced by the media attention. These criticisms stung, but Marcus remained focused on what was best for Amira rather than public opinion. The formal evaluation process began with a series of interviews and assessments. Psychologists met with both Marcus and Amira, observing their interactions and evaluating their compatibility. The sessions were emotionally challenging, requiring Amira to recall traumatic experiences while helping the professionals understand her needs and preferences. Throughout each session, she consistently sought comfort from Marcus, reinforcing the bond that had formed between them. By the end of the week, the hospital was ready to discharge Amira, but the foster care approval process was still ongoing. Temporary arrangements had to be made. Marcus found himself navigating a complex web of regulations, requirements, and bureaucratic procedures. Despite the challenges, his determination never wavered, and his commitment to Amira only grew stronger with each passing day. The home inspection process proved to be both thorough and transformative for Marcus. Social worker Patricia Reynolds arrived at his modest flat near Windsor Castle with a comprehensive checklist and years of experience evaluating potential foster homes. What she found was a meticulously clean bachelor pad that reflected the discipline of military life but lacked any indication that children had ever been welcome. There, Marcus watched nervously as Patricia examined every room, taking notes about safety hazards, sleeping arrangements, and the general suitability of the environment for a traumatized 8-year-old girl. His flat was spotless, but sterile, decorated with military memorabilia and lacking the warmth that a child would need. The spare room he intended to convert into Amira's bedroom was currently being used as a storage space for his ceremonial equipment and personal belongings. Recognizing the work that needed to be done, Marcus threw himself into the task of childproofing and decorating with the same dedication he brought to his military duties. He researched child psychology and trauma recovery, consulted with pediatric specialists, and even attended a crash course on foster parenting. His fellow guards pitched in, helping to paint the spare room in soft, cheerful colors and assemble the new furniture he had purchased. The transformation of Marcus's home became a community effort that extended beyond his military colleagues. Hospital staff who had witnessed his dedication volunteered their time and expertise. Dr. Chen helped him understand Amira's ongoing medical needs, while the hospital's child psychologist provided guidance on creating a therapeutic environment for healing. Even some of the patients who had seen them together during those first days at the hospital contributed small gifts and decorations for Amira's room. Meanwhile, Amira remained in temporary care at a specialized children's facility while the approval process continued. Marcus visited her daily, bringing books, toys, and most importantly, consistency in his presence. The facility staff noted remarkable improvements in her behavior and emotional state during his visits. She was sleeping better, eating more, and beginning to engage with other children and caregivers. The legal proceedings regarding Amira's previous living situation moved forward simultaneously. The relatives who had been responsible for her care were charged with multiple counts of child abuse and neglect. The investigation revealed that Amira had been essentially enslaved, forced to work and care for younger children while being denied proper food, medical care, and education. The full extent of her suffering was heartbreaking, but it also strengthened the case for her permanent removal from that environment. During this period, Marcus also underwent extensive background checks and psychological evaluations. Military investigators reviewed his entire service record, while social services examined his financial stability, mental health, and capacity for providing long-term care. The process was invasive and sometimes frustrating, but Marcus understood its necessity and cooperated fully with every requirement. The media attention continued to grow, bringing both support and complications. A documentary crew requested permission to follow their story, while publishers offered book deals and movie producers expressed interest in adaptation rights. Marcus declined all commercial opportunities, concerned about exploiting Amira's trauma for profit. However, he did agree to participate in a charity campaign to raise awareness about refugee children and foster care needs. Public support manifested in practical ways that touched Marcus deeply. Donations poured in to help with the costs of preparing his home and supporting Amira's needs. A local school offered a scholarship for her education, while a children's therapy center provided free counseling services. The community response demonstrated the power of compassion to inspire others to action. However, the scrutiny also brought challenges. Some questioned Marcus's motives, wondering if the attention had influenced his decision to foster Amira. Others criticized the system for fast-tracking his application while other potential foster families waited months for approval. Marcus found himself defending his intentions and commitment in interviews and formal hearings, a process that was emotionally draining but necessary. The breakthrough came during a supervised visit at Marcus's newly prepared flat. Amira walked through her decorated bedroom, touching the colorful walls and examining the carefully chosen furniture and toys. For the first time since Marcus had found her, she smiled genuinely and spontaneously. She looked up at him and said in her improving English, "This is really for me?" When he confirmed that it was, she hugged him tightly and whispered, "Thank you, Papa Marcus." That moment convinced everyone involved in the decision-making process that this placement was right. The social workers witnessed the authentic bond between Marcus and Amira. Recognizing that their connection went far beyond publicity or good intentions, Patricia Reynolds recommended immediate approval for the foster placement, noting in her report that she had rarely seen such a clear case of mutual need and genuine affection. The final legal hurdles were cleared within days of that visit. Marcus officially became Amira's emergency foster parent, with the possibility of adoption pending further legal proceedings and time for both of them to adjust to their new life together. As he signed the paperwork that would make him responsible for this brave little girl, Marcus felt a mixture of excitement, terror, profound purpose that he had never experienced before. The first weeks of living together were both magical and challenging in ways Marcus had never anticipated. Amira moved into his flat with nothing but the few belongings that had been purchased for her. During her stay at the children's facility, watching her explore her new home with wonder and cautious hope reminded Marcus of the tremendous responsibility he had undertaken. Every small decision, from what to have for breakfast to which television programs were appropriate, required careful consideration of her emotional and physical well-being. Sleep proved to be one of the biggest challenges. Amira suffered from frequent nightmares that would wake her screaming in the middle of the night. Marcus found himself becoming an expert at soothing her back to sleep, developing a routine of warm milk, gentle stories, and patient reassurance that she was safe. The child psychologist had warned him about this, but experiencing it firsthand was heartbreaking. On particularly difficult nights, Amira would ask to sleep on a small mattress beside his bed, and Marcus learned that sometimes flexibility was more important than established boundaries. Marcus's work schedule required significant adjustments to accommodate his new role as a foster father. His commanding officers proved remarkably supportive, ranging from modified duties that kept him closer to home and allowed for more predictable hours. Fellow guards stepped up to cover additional shifts, understanding that their colleague was facing challenges that went beyond military service. The Royal Guard had never dealt with a situation quite like this, but the organization's values of duty and service extended naturally to supporting. Marcus, in his commitment to Amira, enrolling Amira in school, presented its own set of complications. Her education had been severely neglected, and she was reading and writing well below grade level. Additionally, her limited English skills and trauma-related behavioral issues required special accommodations. The local primary school was willing to work with them, but Marcus realized that Amira would need extensive tutoring and support to catch up with her peers. He hired a specialist tutor who had experience working with refugee children, and slowly but steadily, Amira began to make progress. The medical appointments continued regularly, monitoring both her physical healing and psychological recovery. Dr. Chen remained involved in Amira's care, noting significant improvements in her overall health as proper nutrition and medical attention addressed years of neglect. The cigarette burns were fading, her broken wrist had healed properly with the cast, and she was gaining weight at a healthy rate. More importantly, her demeanor was changing from fearful and withdrawn to increasingly confident and curious about the world around her. Social. Worker visits were a regular part of their routine, with Patricia Reynolds conducting monthly assessments to ensure that the placement was working well for both Marcus and Amira. These visits initially made Amira nervous, as she associated official interviews with potential removal from her home. Marcus worked hard to help her understand that these visits were meant to help and protect her, not to separate them. Over time, she became more comfortable with Patricia, even looking forward to showing off her latest school projects or artwork. The media attention gradually decreased, but it never completely disappeared. Reporters would occasionally approach Marcus during his public duties, asking for updates on Amira's progress or seeking new angles to the story. He maintained his policy of protecting her privacy while acknowledging the public's genuine interest in their welfare. Several times he used these opportunities to advocate for other children in foster care and to highlight the ongoing needs of refugee families. Marcus discovered that fatherhood required skills he had never developed during his military career. Learning to braid hair, helping with homework, and navigating the complex social dynamics of elementary school friendships were challenges that no amount of guard training had prepared him for. He made mistakes regularly, sometimes being too strict when patience was needed, or too permissive when structure was required. Amira proved to be remarkably forgiving of his learning curve, perhaps understanding that they were both adapting to an entirely new way of life. The support network that had formed around them proved invaluable during this adjustment period. Fellow guards' families included them in social gatherings, helping Amira develop relationships with other children while giving Marcus opportunities to learn from experienced parents. Hospital staff members stayed in touch, offering advice and encouragement during difficult moments. Even strangers who had followed their story would occasionally send letters or small gifts, reminding them that they had touched people's hearts around the world. One particularly meaningful development was Amira's relationship with Marcus's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield. The retired teacher had observed their comings and goings with interest and eventually offered to help with childcare when Marcus's duties required longer hours. Amira was initially shy around the kind older woman, but Mrs. Whitfield's patient gentleness and homemade cookies gradually won her over. Having this additional support person in their lives provided both practical help and emotional security for Amira. As autumn approached, Marcus realized that their temporary foster arrangement was beginning to feel permanent in the best possible way. Amira had started calling him Papa without prompting, and he found himself thinking about their future together in terms of years rather than months. The legal process for adoption would be complex and lengthy, but both Marcus and Amira seemed ready to make that commitment. During a quiet evening, as they worked on her homework together, Amira looked up at him and asked, "Will you be my daddy forever?" Marcus's answer came without hesitation. "If that's what you want, then yes, forever." The adoption process proved to be even more complex than the initial foster care placement. Marcus and Amira had to navigate a labyrinth of legal requirements, court hearings, and evaluations that tested their patience and resolve. The court appointed a guardian ad litem to represent Amira's interests, and additional psychological evaluations were required to ensure that adoption was truly in her best interest. Each step of the process felt like a test of their commitment to each other, but it also strengthened their bond as they faced these challenges together. During this period, an unexpected complication arose when distant relatives of Amira's emerged, claiming they wanted to provide her with a home within her cultural community. These relatives lived in another part of England and had not been involved in her life previously, but their claim created a legal challenge that required careful consideration by the courts. Marcus found himself fighting not just bureaucracy, but also questions about whether he could adequately preserve Amira's cultural identity and heritage. This challenge forced Marcus to confront aspects of parenting he hadn't previously considered. He began learning about Syrian culture, history, and traditions, wanting to ensure that Amira maintained connections to her heritage even while building a new life in England. They started attending cultural events in London's Syrian community, where Amira could hear her native language and experience familiar foods and customs. These experiences were sometimes overwhelming for her, bringing back memories of her homeland, but they also provided a sense of continuity and identity that Marcus recognized as crucial for her development. The court proceedings required Amira to testify about her preferences and experiences, a process that was carefully managed to minimize trauma while ensuring her voice was heard. In a closed hearing with only the judge, lawyers, and her guardian ad litem present, Amira spoke clearly about her desire to stay with Marcus. She described feeling safe and loved in ways she had never experienced before, and her testimony was both heartbreaking and compelling. The judge was visibly moved by her mature, understanding of her situation and her articulate expression of her feelings. Marcus's testimony focused on his long-term commitment to Amira's welfare and his understanding of the responsibilities involved in adoption. He spoke about the changes she had brought to his life, describing how caring for her had given him a sense of purpose that extended beyond his military service. He outlined his plans for her education, his commitment to honoring her cultural heritage, and his determination to provide her with the stability and love she needed to heal from her traumatic experiences. The decision wasn't immediate. The judge took several weeks to consider all the evidence, testimony, and recommendations before ruling. During this waiting period, Marcus and Amira continued their daily routine, but both were anxious about the outcome. Amira had nightmares about being taken away, while Marcus found himself constantly worrying about legal details and potential complications. The uncertainty was emotionally exhausting for both of them. Support came from unexpected sources during this difficult time. The royal family's private secretary reached out to express their support for Marcus's commitment to Amira, noting that his actions exemplified the values of service and compassion that the monarchy represented. While this endorsement couldn't influence the legal proceedings, it provided Marcus with reassurance that his career wouldn't suffer regardless of the outcome. The Syrian community in London also rallied around them, with several families testifying to the court about Marcus's genuine efforts to help. Amira maintained connections to her cultural roots. These testimonies helped counter arguments that she would be better served by placement within the Syrian community, demonstrating that cultural preservation and loving care weren't mutually exclusive. When the judge finally announced her decision, the courtroom was packed with supporters, including fellow guards, hospital staff, and members of both the English and Syrian communities who had followed their story. The judge ruled that adoption was in Amira's best interest, noting the clear bond between her and Marcus, his demonstrated commitment to her welfare, and her own clearly expressed preferences. The ruling emphasized that love and stability transcended cultural and ethnic boundaries. While acknowledging Marcus's efforts to honor Amira's heritage, the moment the decision was announced, Amira ran to Marcus and hugged him tightly, tears of joy streaming down both their faces. The months of uncertainty and legal challenges had finally ended, and they were officially a family. The courtroom erupted in applause from their supporters, and even the usually stoic legal professionals seemed moved by the emotional scene. The formal adoption ceremony took place a month later, with Amira choosing to take Marcus's last name while keeping her original first name as a connection to her Syrian identity. She wore a beautiful dress that Mrs. Whitfield had helped her pick out, and Marcus wore his dress uniform for the occasion. As they signed the final papers, Amira officially became Amira Thompson, daughter of Marcus Thompson. With all the legal rights and emotional security that adoption provided, the celebration that followed was a reflection of the community that had formed around them. Guards from Marcus's unit attended alongside hospital staff, social workers, teachers from Amira's school, and new friends from the Syrian community. The party was held at the community center near their home, with traditional English tea served alongside Syrian sweets and dishes that reminded Amira of happier times in her childhood. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus and Amira sat together quietly, both still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. They were no longer a foster family or a temporary arrangement. They were permanently and legally father and daughter, with all the joys and responsibilities that relationship entailed. 2 years after the adoption was finalized, the transformation in both Marcus and Amira's lives was remarkable. Amira had not only caught up academically with her peers, but was excelling in her studies. Particularly in mathematics and art, her English had become fluent, though she maintained her ability to speak Arabic, which she practiced with friends in the Syrian community and during weekly calls with a distant aunt who had been located in Canada. The nightmares had largely stopped, replaced by dreams of becoming a doctor so she could help other children the way Dr. Chen had helped her. Marcus discovered that fatherhood had changed him in ways he never expected. The rigid discipline that had defined his military life softened into a more flexible approach to daily challenges. He learned to find joy in small moments, helping with homework, attending school plays, teaching Amira to ride a bicycle in the park near their home. His fellow guards often remarked that he seemed more relaxed and happy than they had ever seen him. Despite the additional responsibilities and challenges that came with raising a child, the story of the Royal Guard and the rescued girl had inspired changes beyond their personal lives. The hospital where they first met established a special fund to help other refugee children access medical care and support services. Marcus was invited to speak at conferences about foster care and adoption, sharing his experience to encourage other potential foster parents. He always emphasized that he wasn't a hero, just someone who chose to help when help was needed. Amira's recovery had been remarkable, but it wasn't without ongoing challenges. She still sometimes struggled with trust issues and had developed a fierce independence that occasionally clashed with normal parental boundaries. Therapy sessions continued monthly, helping both father and daughter navigate the complexities of their relationship and address any emerging concerns. Dr. Patricia Martin, their family counselor, noted that their bond was exceptionally strong, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than mere obligation. The media attention had evolved from sensational news coverage to occasional feature stories about their progress and the broader issues their story highlighted. Marcus had learned to use this platform thoughtfully, advocating for policy changes in child welfare services and supporting organizations that helped refugee families. Amira, now 10 years old, had become comfortable with occasional public appearances, understanding that their story could help other children in similar situations. 1. Particularly meaningful development was the establishment of the Thompson Foundation, a small charity that Marcus and Amira created together to help other children who had experienced trauma and displacement. Using donations that continued to arrive from people touched by their story, they provided emergency funds for medical care, educational support, and basic necessities for children in crisis. Amira insisted on being involved in selecting which families to help, displaying a maturity and compassion that constantly amazed Marcus. Marcus's military career had also evolved to accommodate his new role as a father. He had been promoted to warrant officer, a position that allowed him to train new guards while maintaining more predictable hours. His superiors valued his leadership experience and the perspective that fatherhood had given him. The Royal Guard organization had even implemented new policies to better support service members with families, recognizing that personal fulfillment often enhanced rather than detracted from professional performance. The relationship between Marcus and Amira had deepened into something beautiful and unshakable. She had taught him about resilience, showing him that healing was possible even from the most severe trauma. He had given her security and unconditional love, now proving that family wasn't always defined by blood, but could be chosen and built through commitment and care. Their evening conversations had become treasured time for both of them, sharing the events of their day and planning for the future. School had become a source of pride and joy for Amira. Her teachers noted her exceptional empathy with other students, particularly those who were struggling or felt like outsiders. She had started a peer support group for children from immigrant families, helping them navigate the challenges of adapting to a new culture while maintaining connections to their heritage. Her leadership skills and natural compassion suggested a bright future in whatever field she chose to pursue. As Marcus watched Amira blow out the candles on her 10th birthday cake, surrounded by friends from school, neighbors, and the extended family of guards and medical professionals who had become part of their lives, he reflected on how much had changed since that morning when he found a frightened little girl hiding behind dustbins. The formal Royal Guard, who had once lived a solitary, duty-focused life, had discovered that his greatest service wasn't to the crown, but to this remarkable child who had chosen to trust him with her future. The birthday party was celebration not just of Amira's 10th year, but of their journey together as a family. Mrs. Whitfield had helped bake the cake, decorating it with both English roses and Syrian jasmine flowers to honor both sides of Amira's identity. Dr. Chen attended with her own children, who had become close friends with Amira. Patricia Reynolds brought a gift from the Social Services Department, acknowledging that this adoption had become a model case study for successful cross-cultural placements. Later that evening, As they cleaned up the party decorations together, Amira surprised Marcus with a handmade card she had created at school. Inside, she had written in careful handwriting, "Dear Papa, thank you for saving me that day, but mostly thank you for choosing to be my daddy every day since then. I love you forever and always. Your daughter, Amira." Reading those words, Marcus understood that the scared little girl he had carried into the hospital had not only survived but thrived, becoming a confident, compassionate young person with unlimited potential. The story that had begun with a royal guard's simple act of compassion had rippled outward, touching countless lives and inspiring changes in policies, attitudes, and individual actions. But at its heart, it remained the story of two people who had found each other when they both needed healing. A soldier who had learned that true strength came from vulnerability and love, and a child who had discovered that trust could be rebuilt and that family could be found in the most unexpected places as they settled into their evening routine. With Amira reading quietly in her colorful bedroom and Marcus reviewing his duty roster for the following week, both father and daughter knew that their greatest adventure was still ahead of them. The future held challenges they couldn't anticipate, but it also held the certainty that they would face those challenges together, as a family built not by circumstance but by choice, commitment, and unwavering love.